At 92 years old, Kim Novak finally speaks with a clarity that only time can grant. For decades, Hollywood told a polished story, a glamorous love, a golden age romance, a beautiful blonde, and a charming movie star. But the truth was never that simple. Behind the carefully staged photographs and studio-approved headlines, there was another reality, one filled with pressure, insecurity, control, and emotional distance. And at the center of it all stood Tony Curtis, a man adored by millions, yet deeply misunderstood by those who knew him best. Kim Novak was born Marilyn Pauline Novak on February 13, 1933, in Chicago, Illinois. Her childhood was far removed from spotlights and red carpets. Raised in a working-class Czech-American family, she grew up surrounded by discipline, modesty, and resilience. Her father worked as a history teacher and freight dispatcher. Her mother spent long hours as a factory worker. There was no privilege waiting for her, no shortcuts, only quiet determination. From a young age, Kim showed artistic sensitivity and a fierce independence. She did not dream of fame, she dreamed of expression. She enrolled at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, believing her future lay in commercial art, not cinema. Hollywood was not a destination she chased, it was something that found her unexpectedly. When she was noticed during a modeling assignment and eventually signed by Columbia Pictures in the early 1950s, the studio had plans for her. Big plans. Studio head Harry Cohn envisioned her as a manufactured replacement for Rita Hayworth, a carefully controlled image, a compliant star, a fantasy created for mass consumption. But Kim Novak resisted. She refused to change her name. She rejected the artificial glamour. She questioned authority in an era when young actresses were expected to obey without hesitation. That resistance would shape her entire life and quietly place her on a collision course with the darker realities of Hollywood fame. And it was within that unforgiving system that her path would cross with Tony Curtis. Before the world saw them as a perfect match, Kim Novak saw something else entirely. Something restless, something unresolved, something deeply human. Kim Novak's ascent in Hollywood was swift, but it was never effortless. Unlike many young actresses of the era, she did not glide into stardom protected by enthusiasm or illusion. She arrived cautious, observant, and emotionally guarded. The studio saw a potential icon. Kim saw a system built on control. Her early roles revealed something audiences couldn't quite name but immediately felt. In Pushover in 1954 and then Picnic in 1955, there was a natural magnetism in her presence. She didn't perform emotions. She allowed them to surface. Vulnerability mixed with a strength. Sensuality softened by introspection. It was impossible to look away. Her performance in Picnic earned her a Golden Globe for Most Promising Newcomer, officially announcing her arrival as a serious, dramatic actress. But even as her career surged forward, her discomfort with fame grew deeper. Kim never enjoyed being watched. She endured it. Audiences sensed her difference instinctively. She was not polished in the way that a studio preferred. She carried silence into her roles, longing, melancholy, emotional complexity that resisted simplification. Hollywood tried to mold her, but she refused to be reshaped. Then came 1958, Vertigo. Cast opposite James Stewart in Alfred Hitchcock's haunting masterpiece, Kim Novak was asked to do something few actresses could accomplish, become two women at once. Madeleine Elster and Judy Barton were not simply characters. They were psychological fractures, shifts in identity. desire entangled with despair. At the time of its release, Vertigo received mixed reactions, but history would correct that judgment. Decades later, it would be hailed as one of the greatest films ever made, and at the heart of its power stood Kim Novak. Her performance, quiet, wounded, restrained, became central to the film's legacy. She brought depth where others might have offered a surface beauty. She conveyed longing with a stillness, inner conflict with a glance, pain without words. Yet as her artistic credibility soared, her personal unease deepened, the industry's expectations grew heavier, privacy evaporated, control tightened. Every relationship became a headline, every emotion became a liability, and it was during this fragile balance between fame and resistance, admiration and confinement, that Tony Curtis entered her life more intimately, not as a fairy tale, but as a complication. By the late 1950s and early 1960s, Kim Novak had become more than a star. She had become a symbol, one the studios believed they owned, or she appeared in a string of notable films that kept her name glowing across marquees and gossip columns. Bell, Book, and Candle in 1958, Middle of the Night in 1959, Strangers, When We Meet in 1960, and Of Human Bondage in 1964. Each role reinforced what audiences already suspected. Kim had something rare, not just beauty, not just a screen presence, but a quiet, emotional authority. Yet the more successful she became, the less she belonged to herself. Fame, for Kim, was never a celebration. It was a constant intrusion. The scrutiny was relentless. The control of her personal life was invasive. The industry's expectations were suffocating. And unlike many of her contemporaries, Kim never fully surrendered to those demands. She didn't play the Hollywood game with a smile. She challenged it. She resisted the studio's approved version of her. And Hollywood, coldly, predictably, never forgave her for that. Because in that era, this studio system didn't just shape careers, it shaped lives, and it certainly shaped love. Kim would later describe the cruel truth of it with a simplicity that cuts deeper than any scandal. You didn't date privately, you dated publicly. You dated in headlines, you dated under the shadow of executives, publicists, staged photographs, and whispered warnings behind soundstage doors. This was the world Tony Curtis thrived in. Tony was already a rising force, a man built for cameras, built for attention, built for momentum. He carried charisma like a weapon and charm like a shield. When he walked into a room, people felt it. He could light up a space instantly, almost effortlessly. But Kim noticed something that the public never saw. He was never still. Tony's energy wasn't simply confidence, it was restlessness. A constant chase. Approval, excitement, love, sometimes all at once and sometimes without knowing which one he wanted most. Kim felt drawn to him, but wary at the same time, as if something in her recognized the danger of loving a man who was always in motion. To outsiders, their connection looked like glamour. To Kim, it felt like pressure, because when you are young, controlled by studios, and surrounded by people who profit from your image, love becomes complicated. Every emotion gets measured, every moment becomes usable. Even chemistry becomes a commodity. And Kim Novak, who craved depth, quiet, authenticity, found herself orbiting someone who lived on momentum. For years, people wanted the fairy tale version, the easy story, the legend, the gossip. But Kim's truth was more human than that and far more unsettling. At 92, Kim Novak no longer speaks to protect illusions, not Hollywood's illusions, not the public's fantasies, not even the legends built around the men she once stood beside. And when she finally talks about Tony Curtis, what she offers isn't a scandal. It's something far rarer: perspective. She remembers Tony as the world remembers him: handsome, magnetic, ambitious, sharply aware of his own appeal. A man who seemed born for the stardom, the kind of actor who didn't just enter a room but claimed it. But Kim insists the public only knew half of him, because behind the bright smile and movie star swagger was someone else entirely, someone quieter, someone unsure, someone who never quite felt safe inside his own fame. In public, Tony was the star. In private, Kim saw the insecure boy, a boy who, despite all the applause, never fully believed he was enough. And she doesn't say this with bitterness. She doesn't try to punish him with her truth. If anything, her voice carries something close to compassion, like she's looking back and recognizing the emotional damage beneath the charm. Tony, she recalls, could be incredibly kind, funny, generous. He could make you feel chosen, special, seen. And then, without warning, he could become distant, defensive, shut down. It wasn't always cruelty. It was fear. Fame didn't heal him. It amplified whatever wounds he already carried. It made his anxieties louder. It fed his ego and his insecurity at the same time, creating a man who could be intoxicating one moment and unreachable the next. Kim acknowledges what people always wanted to hear. Yes, there was passion, but she refuses to let that be the whole story, because alongside passion, there was also competition, ego, pressure, the suffocating weight of being young, watched, controlled, and forced to perform not just on screen, but in life. They weren't two carefree lovers in a golden age romance. They were two young people trying to survive inside a machine that rewarded illusion more than truth. And that's the part Kim refuses to let history erase. People love simple narratives, she says. They want someone to be the villain, someone to be the heartbreaker, someone to blame, someone to idolize. But Kim won't do that. Tony wasn't a monster. He was a man shaped by poverty, ambition, and a Hollywood system that encouraged excess and discouraged reflection. A system that taught stars how to be adored, but rarely taught them how to be emotionally whole. And then Kim says something that feels like the real heart of it all. She needed depth, quiet, authenticity. Tony thrived on momentum. Neither of them was wrong. They were simply mismatched. Kim Novak's voice, at 92, does not sound like a woman revisiting gossip. It sounds like someone revisiting a lesson. Because what she describes isn't a sensational romance. It's the quiet, emotional exhaustion of loving someone who could never stop moving. Someone who was always chasing the next rush, the next reassurance, the next validation. And that kind of love, no matter how thrilling it looks from the outside, has a cost. Kim says she doesn't regret knowing Tony. That's what makes her honesty even heavier. Because regret would be easy. Regret would be a neat ending. But her truth is deeper than that. She speaks of him as part of her journey, part of her education. Through Tony, she learned what she could not accept, what she would not compromise. And that sentence alone reveals how much she had already endured, how much she had already been asked to bend herself by studios, by expectations, by the relentless demand to be whatever the industry wanted. Tony wasn't the only force pulling at her. Hollywood itself was pulling at her every day. But with Tony, the emotional dynamic became painfully clear. Kim craved something steady, something rooted, something that didn't vanish the moment the applause faded. Tony, meanwhile, seemed energized by movement, by noise, by the constant feeling of being chased and admired. So even when there was warmth between them, it was never fully safe because Kim needed presence and Tony lived in escape. She doesn't accuse him, she doesn't attack him. She simply lays the reality down like a truth she has carried for decades. There are people you can love and still know you cannot build a life with them. And then, with the wisdom of age, she does something rare. She reframes him. She pauses and says that if Tony were here today, she believes he would want to be understood, not idolized, not turned into a legend, not flattened into a headline, not worshipped as a movie star without acknowledging the fragile human being underneath. And that, according to Kim, is what the world always missed. Tony Curtis was not just charm, not just glamour, not just the golden age heartthrob. He was a man with fear under the surface, a man who carried insecurity like a hidden injury, a man who, even at his brightest, could not fully believe he deserved what he had. Kim says the public wanted chemistry without complication, glamour without consequence. But real life doesn't work that way, and neither did Tony. Kim Novak's truth about Tony Curtis doesn't exist in isolation. It sits inside a much larger reality, one that defined her entire life in Hollywood. Because while the world watched her as an icon, the studio system watched her as property. And in the mid-1950s, at the peak of her desirability and fame, her personal life became a battlefield where powerful people believed they had the right to decide what she could feel, who she could love, and what kind of woman she was allowed to be. Her romantic associations placed her in the orbit of men whose power stretched far beyond movie sets. One of them was Ramfis Trujillo, the notorious son of Dominican dictator Rafael Leonidas Trujillo, an involvement that showed just how dangerously close a celebrity could bring you to real-world influence and intimidation. But the most consequential relationship of that era came in 1957 when Kim Novak became involved with legendary entertainer Sammy Davis Jr. It wasn't simply a romance, it was a collision with one of Hollywood's most rigid and shameful boundaries, race. At a time when interracial relationships were not just frowned upon, but actively suppressed, Kim and Sammy's relationship became a flashpoint of prejudice, fear, and institutional brutality. According to a BBC documentary, Columbia Pictures chief Harry Cohn, desperate to protect Novak's, manufactured a screen image and avoid scandal, allegedly used mob connections to force the relationship to end. Sammy Davis Jr. was reportedly threatened with horrific violence, being blinded or having his legs broken, unless he married a black woman within 48 hours. That episode remains one of the most chilling examples of how the studio system controlled actors' private lives. It exposed the cruelty behind Hollywood's glamorous facade, and it left scars that no amount of fame could erase. In the years that followed, Kim Novak's romantic life remained a source of public fascination. She was linked to actor Michael Brandon, basketball icon Wilt Chamberlain, and British actor David Hemmings, connections that reflected both her wide social circle and her refusal to follow convention. In 1959, she became engaged to director Richard Quine, a bond that blended affection with professional collaboration. But the engagement did not lead to marriage. Her first marriage came several years later, when she wed English actor Richard Johnson on March 15, 1965. The marriage was brief, ending in divorce on May 26, 1966. Yet even then, There was no public bitterness. Remarkably, they remained friends afterward. Another quiet sign of Kim's emotional maturity, her ability to end things with grace rather than destruction. And then, in that same year, she did something that Hollywood never expected from one of its most valuable stars. She walked away, disillusioned by the pressure and exhausted by the invasion of her life. Kim Novak left Hollywood and relocated to Big Sur, California. It wasn't a publicity stunt. It wasn't a temporary retreat. It was a choice for survival. There, surrounded by rugged coastline and natural beauty, she built a life that had nothing to do with premieres or gossip columns. She raised horses, she painted, she reclaimed herself. Later, fate intervened in 1974 in the most unexpected way. One of her prized Arabian mares suffered a bout of colic, and an equine veterinarian named Robert Malloy was called for a house visit. A routine professional encounter became something deeper. Malloy was grounded and compassionate, everything the Hollywood world had not been. With him, Kim found a partnership untouched by manipulation and manufactured narrative. They married on March 12, 1976, and through that union she gained 2 adult stepchildren, embracing family life with warmth and commitment. Together, they built a log home along the Williamson River near Klamath Falls, Oregon, a peaceful retreat that symbolized her full departure from Hollywood's glare. Their marriage endured for more than 4 decades, a rare and profound success story after a life marked by upheaval and reinvention. Robert Malloy passed away on November 27, 2020, closing a long chapter of love and stability. But Kim's legacy remained unchanged. She was the woman who chose authenticity over fame, reflection over spectacle, and peace over applause. And that is why her words at 92 land so differently now. When she finally speaks about Tony Curtis, it isn't to revive gossip, it's to strip away the myth. She offers something far more valuable than a scandal. She offers a human being underneath the legend. Because at 92, Kim Novak no longer feels the need to protect anyone's illusion, Hollywood's, the public's, or even Tony Curtis's. Only the truth.